Welcome to Only for Your Ears and today's episode 31, The Gardener and the Noble Family, written by Hans Christian Andersen, which I've renamed as Pride Fall Pride Goeth Before a Fall. Let me repeat it. Pride goeth before a fall. The structure will remain the same, starting off with a summary where I'll digress on the most highlighted points of the summary. Then I will give a reflection. Next will be my critical review on how this fairy tale plays in today's society, along with some examples either from films or book or from real life situations or history. And last but not least, we'll go on to our trigger points. Now, as you know, you can have positive and negative trigger points. So let's begin with the gardener and the noble family, or as I've renamed it as Pride Goeth Before a Fall. The Gardener and the Noble Family, written by Hans Christian Andersen, tells the story of a skillful gardener named Larsen who works for a wealthy noble family. I digress. I can see the layers of the class system peering at me from the first sentence. They own a beautiful manor house where they live during the summer holidays. I digress. Of course, the gardener looks after their second home, which most people in today's economy can't afford. The gardener takes great care of the gardens, orchards, and greenhouses, but the family often compares his work to that of others, making him strive harder to impress them. I digress. Ah, bless. The noble ones take his work for granted because they don't have an eye for talent. Reflections. Recognizing the contributions of others through the story, the noble family is slow to give credit to the gardener for his achievements. I digress. This is directly related to a class system mentality. How could someone so beneath them exude such talent? However, as they begin to recognize the value of his work, they also come to appreciate his role in their lives. I digress again. Yes, because their adjoining neighbors were quick to spot the gardener's green thumb. This theme emphasizes the importance of acknowledging and valuing the contributions of others, regardless of their social status. I digress. Their friends had no problem with this recognition except his own employees. One day, the family praises apples and pears they had eaten at the friend's house, not knowing that these fruits came from their own garden. I digress. This is typical underestimation of their own employee. He could he could possibly possess such talent. Larsen proves their origin with a written guarantee from the fruit dealer. He was smart. I digress again. He knew whom he was working for and that he needed proof to support his hard work. That's a shame. The family is surprised and proud, sending their fruits as gifts to friends and even abroad. I digress. They are proud more of themselves than the gardener's abilities. However, they remind the gardener that the past 2 summers have been favorable for fruits everywhere. I digress. These pompous idiots just refuse to offer praise and gratitude to their precious employee. Reflections. The relationship between social class and perception. The story also explores how social class, and expectations can influence the way people perceive the world, and the noble family often dismisses the gardener's achievements, seeing them as less significant due to his lower social status. I digress. But they're not so lowly to enjoy the fruits of his labor and send these fruits to their friends in foreign lands. However, the gardener's expertise and passion for his work create a beautiful, thriving garden that wins the admiration of others, including the princess. I digress. Even the princess has the wisdom to recognize what clearly his employers refuse to see. After a similar incident with melons, the family starts to worry that Larsen might become too proud. I digress. This is a total reflection about themselves and not the gardener. Nevertheless, he continues to work hard and innovate, although his new achievements are often met with comparisons to his initial success. I digress. Now I'm boiling mad. One day he presents the family with a beautiful flower, which turns out to be a mere artichoke flower. I digress. Their ignorance make them look foolish. Not the gardener. The family scolds him for making them look foolish in front of a princess. However, the princess appreciates the gardener's creativity and orders an artichoke flower for her own room every day. I digress. Thank goodness for the basic common sense of the princess, who gives him the praise his own employers won't. A storm destroys two old trees, which the family mourns as a loss of history. Larsen sees an opportunity to use the newly available space to create a unique garden with native plants. I digress. Larsen is smart, innovative, and opportunistic. His creative arrangement is admired by the family, who acknowledged his loyalty and sentimentality. Reflection. Tradition and change. The story also touches on the tensions between tradition and change. The noble family is initially resistant to the gardener's suggestions, such as removing the old trees, out of a desire to maintain their connection to the past. I digress. This isn't unusual, people, that people are normally fearful and resistant to change because of a loss of jobs, or the new way will destroy all the past progress. That's what they feel. However, when the trees are finally removed, it opens up the new possibilities for the garden, and the gardener is able to create and beautiful a unique and beautiful space that celebrates both tradition and innovation. A newspaper praises the manor's tradition of feeding birds during the winter season, attributing the idea to Larsen. I digress. What a smart idea of the newspaper, perhaps realizing the noble family would never fully publicly recognize their employees' ideas. The family admits that they should be proud to have him, but they continue to assert their authority as the masters of the manor. The story ends by emphasizing that there are many good people like the noble family in the world, which is fortunate for all the Larsens out there. I digress. Thank goodness for the Larsens of the world. Let's hope there are far less prideful families out there too. Reflection. Appreciation of simple beauty. The story highlights the importance of appreciating the beauty in simple, everyday things. For instance, the noble family is initially impressed by the artichoke flower, believing it would be a rare and exotic plant. When they learn it is a common kitchen herb, they are embarrassed, but later come to appreciate its beauty. I digress. Their ignorance about all things green embarrasses them, not Larsen. So, what an interesting story that is, it turned out to be. Again, running along the lines of Hans Christian Andersen, look at social class, power, authority, in so many different ways, nature. Let's continue with my critical review on how the fairy tale plays in today's society. The gardener and the noble family touched a nerve in me. I was reminded of the working class structure I was raised in London, born into immigrant a family from Jamaica. I'm reminded of Enoch Powell's speech in Parliament referring to the influx of immigrants that poured into England after the Second World War. Its words, it was words to the effect, thank you for your service in this country, but it's time for you to pack your bags and go home. Now, people were outraged that he dare utter the truth, but I wasn't surprised, though. He was not only airing what all political hypocrites didn't have the guts to say. My parents were initially persuaded to come to England in search of a better future, i.e., doing the work that English people didn't want to do. In his speech, he thanked the immigrant family and their services to Britain, but talented and skillful work it took to do these jobs. And it took a lot of talent and skillful work too. So this fairy tale reminded me of the thankless attitude this gardener was confronted with and the classist biases of this time too. The idea that just because you're an immigrant, working class, and a different color, you're not worthy of recognition for your talents and contributions to society. Katherine Johnson won the Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama for outstanding achievement with NASA and for being a brilliant mathematician. Ben Carson, who successfully divided a set of German twins from the head, a brilliant neurosurgeon, and Vivian Thomas, who started out as a carpenter with no qualifications after high school, becomes a noteworthy surgeon and innovator at Johns Hopkins Hospital. And last but not least, Sir Winston Churchill, who was persuaded by the working class to fight against Hitler's regime. Let's take a look at some examples that I'm going to read. I digress. Thank goodness for the basic common sense of Prince the princess who gives him the praise his own employees won't. Now, I'm going to take a look at The Darkest Hour, the film about Winston Churchill and his ability to persuade his own cabinet to fight Hitler and beat the regime with alongside with the United States' help. Now, during this time, a lot of these political people, as well as Winston Churchill, they were just snobs. They were just outrageous snobs, and they were so high on their intellectualism that they didn't really care about really communicating and connecting with people and really understanding the movement and the condition of the country. So in the film, telling. Churchill is surrounded by men who are very much like himself, tone deaf, basically. Rich, high-born, educated, and powerful. These men, it turns out, are much more sympathetic to fascism than the rest of the British public, and they continually urge Churchill to make peace with Hitler and Mussolini. Now there becomes an interesting twist. The film pivots around the scene when Churchill ventures into the London Underground to talk about the war with working class, yes, working class women and men. Through a series of questions, he discovers they are willing to make the sacrifices to stop fascism. They have more gumption and more steadfastness than all of those men up in politics put together. He discovered the focus group knowledge. Knowledge strengthens his resolve, but first he still has to find the skills to persuade the king, his cabinet, and parliament to fight back against the Axis powers instead of surrendering. Well, in the end, everybody knows what happens. He does persuade the king. He does persuade his um, cabinet from what the working class people had told him and said, fight, fight, and fight, fight against Hitler and fight against his regime. And that's what they did. And they won. And this is why you hear today, and still today, the great Winston Churchill, probably the first time he ever listened to anybody except the sound of his own voice. Let's continue with Vivian Thomas. Vivian Theodore Thomas, who is a black man, was a black man born in late August 1910. He was a carpenter. He was a woodmaker who left school with a high school education and went into business for himself. He was approached, or he either approached by a surgeon called Alfred Blockhard, who was from Nashville, the Vanderbilt University in Nashville. He went for a job interview to just find out what this was about. And he ended up being chosen and picked for the job. Well, he didn't realize that he was going to turn into a remarkable surgeon who was able to build bypasses and was able to work in partnership with Blockhard, who performed the first heart surgery on blue babies. Now, blue babies are were babies that had problems with their heart and the circulation of the blood. And so what they had to do was to perform surgery and create a pacemaker to regulate the circulation. Well, in the film, and I think in real life, what happened is that they realized, the university and Johns Hopkins, they realized that even though Alfred Blockhard was in theory the surgeon, the real master was Vivian Thompson, this apparently unqualified surgeon. In fact, when it came to doing the first surgery on this baby, it was Lockhart refused to do the operation unless Vivian Thomas was actually in the operating theatre with him, talking him all the way through the surgery. In fact, after the surgery was a success, his colleagues in the staff room started were laughing, and they said, "We'd like to see Blockhard or Blacklock actually try and perform the surgery himself," because they all knew it was Vivian Thomas, this black man, his assistant, that was the real master behind the success of this surgery. And during this time, he was going through many challenges when it came to being paid. He found out that he was being paid a mere janitor, which is somebody who's a maintenance man in a building. He was getting paid third class, but yet he was performing surgeries like a white man. And he should have been paid first class. He should have been paid maybe hundreds of dollars. And he was getting paid the bare minimum. So there was a real struggle. And there was a problem with Blackheart, Alfred. He did not want to increase his salary, but he knew the only way that he could keep him on was to increase his salary. So he increased it by a small amount, and it was a fight. And they said, "Well, are you going to allow him to go to university?" Because he wanted to go to university to become a surgeon. And they said, "No, I can't afford for him to go to university to become a surgeon. I need him as my right arm man every day," because Blockard knew that he wasn't the real surgeon and he wouldn't be able to do anything without him. So what they did was that they stopped him from being able to become qualified, and therefore not allow him to be paid properly, while at the same time having Alfred maintain this superficial status of being a surgeon that he never was. And at the end of the film and at the end of his life, he says, "I regret, there are some things I regret." And one of the things that he regretted was being so prideful. He would never, ever give Thomas the credit that he deserved. But eventually, after Blockard died, he was recognized at Johns Hopkins Hospital as a surgeon, and they called his name over the tannoy, and they said, "Dr. Vivian Thomas," and they made a portrait of him, and it stood side by side against his old mentor that would never give him the credit. And that reminded me so much of The Gardener. The next one is the famous Katherine Johnson. Now, Katherine Johnson was, back then in the day, to have a black girl be as brilliant as she was. She was an extraordinary mathematician. She went to college and university well beyond her years. I think she must have been about 13 when she was at university. She was so advanced. And then she started working for NASA. And they, of course, NASA was sending spaceships, rocket shuttles up into space to do space exploration, to go to the moon, to look at the galaxy and find out all types of scientific things. Well, she was absolutely brilliant at statistics, numbers, math, and also giving perfect estimation of locations. And there was a problem before the first actual launch, that they said, "We don't know if the numbers are correct." And I think it was Glenn Ford said, if the woman, he wouldn't say black woman, if the woman checks those numbers and she says the coordinates are correct, I'm going up. They had so much confidence and faith in her abilities. She was absolutely outstanding. And she received the Medal of Freedom with Barack Obama. And she also was um, honored with a special medal from NASA. She died 101 years old. They found out the coordinates were perfect. He went up into space and he says, it was incredible. And he says, I'm coming home. And they all thanked Catherine, the only woman that was leading this. And she was quietly led in the background because she wasn't supposed to be there, really. And when the Shuttle 13 was supposed to have been a disaster, it was a disaster. They got lost in space and they did not know how to come back to Earth. It was Catherine. It was Catherine who said, follow the stars. If you follow the stars, you will come back into come back into Earth, come back on Earth. And that's what they did. They followed the stars and they all landed and survived. And it was Katherine Johnson, who probably also never got that much praise, never got that much appreciation until people really started to find out the type of work that she did. And I'm sure she didn't get paid her worth either. Let's move on to the trigger point. Now, getting paid your worth. Vivian Thomas, he sought to increase his salary. Now, Blackard tried to increase Vivian's salary beyond one of a janitor, but couldn't. However, he relayed how valuable he was as an assistant to the establishment, and Viv stayed on. Yes, in real life, he wasn't able to get the big increase in salary that Blockard wanted. They gave him a small amount because they wanted to make sure that he would always remain unqualified so they could justify giving him a low salary. And, that must have been really, really disheartening for him. So they just made sure that they kept him and kept his salary low and made sure that he never reached the qualifications that he needed, because once he got the qualifications, they would have to pay him equal to Alfred, and they did not want to do that. It's not until after Alfred died then they said we've got to do something because he's in charge now. He's in charge of the laboratory. He's in charge of teaching people. He is in charge. These people are learning skills of a surgeon that only Vivian Thomas could do. So in the end, I mean, it triggered me. It really did trigger me. But what I realized in the end, that the quiet, humble Vivian Thomas got his just desserts in the end because they had no choice but to treat him equally or even above Alfred Lockhart. The next one is, experience, being recognized. Um, the church's inability to recognize people's talents, certain people's talents. There's a lot of politics in the church. I was at the church, I was at this church in Barcelona for quite some time, for about 9 years, and then I decided to leave for about 10, and then I came back again. And one of the reasons why I decided to leave is because I was really tired of being judged, put down, and at the same time being made to feel as though I was incompetent. At the same time, they wanted my ideas. I'm a very creative thinker and person, and they secretly loved my ideas, but they never ever wanted to acknowledge that the ideas came from me, and they never wanted to give me any kind of credit for anything. And I think it was really interesting. I think God really intervened, and he says it doesn't matter what she does, whether she puts biscuits on a tray or a table, or what she does, whether she writes poetry, you're going to see the creative talents that I put in this woman, and creative ideas. Well, I think the tipping point was one of the tipping points was the day that I had moved into my apartment. A couple of days afterwards, somebody from the church had come round to help me, and he said, "Oh, Melody, I can't stay too long. I have to go with Priscilla. Um, I'm going to be delivering some Christmas hampers to some families in the church that need it, and also give them some money, and a card." I said, "Oh, how wonderful. I'd love to do that." And what was interesting, it was it was almost as though God said, "They're never going to give you credit for this." But this was my idea. I had mentioned it to Priscilla, and I had said, "I think it would be a good idea to help, especially those families in need at Christmas time, because it's so difficult." And they just took the ideas. They would come to my house because they would ask her to, "Oh, Priscilla, go around to Melody's and see what ideas you can get from her." But they would never, ever, ever, ever acknowledge. They just simply wouldn't. It just simply wouldn't. Nobody would. Nobody would, except God. Well, what really got me mad was in 2009, early in 2009, I had suggested, I said, the women have a women's group to a senior guy that was at the church. And the women have a women's group. What about the men having a men's group? That would be great. You don't have to tell them it's my idea. You could just mention it to them and say it's your idea. I don't mind. I just think it would be great to have some men get together and have a men's group. Well, of course, he didn't follow what I said. He decided that he would tell the pastor, who was most unkind, that it was my idea. So the pastor came up to me and he said, "We don't want any of your ideas." Well, soon after that, I left. And of course, they sent Priscilla around to see if they could wean me back to the church. And I was like, absolutely not doing it. And I left the church for 10 years. And then 10 years later, God brings me back to the church during the time of the pandemic. And within the first 2 weeks, I find out that it took them 10 years to get this men's group off the ground, but they did. And it was like God letting me know, he goes, "Melody, they will never give you the credit for anything. They will never praise you for anything. Prideful. But I just want to let you know, I know it was your idea because I gave you that idea, and I know it was your idea. And I recognize you." So I really, I know I really can relate to the gardener. and always having to work extra hard and never, 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 never getting credit for anything. And the last one is fighting to get my worth. Now, I just want to finish off with what I said just a minute ago. I was able to overcome that trigger of not getting credit because I realized that God recognized my gifts. That's all I want to say. I'm a former English teacher, and let me tell you, it's one of the most thankless jobs you could ever do. Really, just a thankless job. People just don't have appreciation for us. And what's worse is that the schools don't even appreciate their teachers. And it was really, really hard. It's been really hard for a long time, not getting paid my worth. And what I decided to do in 2022 was walk away from a not good situation for myself. And I was really worried about money. I was like, how am I going to survive? But in the end, I made the right decision. And I made a decision to go into business for myself. As scary as it is, but at least eventually, when I go into business for myself, I will get paid what I deserve. So, those are the 3 trigger points. Thank you very much for listening and for viewing. I really appreciate it. And I just want to leave you with a quote. Healing is a lifelong gift, gratitude, blessing, and lesson we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong lesson, gift, and blessing we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Until next week, goodbye. Take care. Don't forget to share, subscribe, doesn't cost you anything, or give me a like. Send me some love. Thank you. Bye bye.